They mocked the substitute bride. Then the Duke saw the silver thimble in her hand. Eliza Wren was never meant to become a duchess. She was summoned from the countryside, pushed beneath her sister's wedding veil, and sent to marry a powerful duke who already knew he had been deceived. He planned to annul the marriage before midnight until an old silver thimble slipped from her sleeve. One engraved letter connected Eliza to the woman who had saved his life 20 years earlier, and to a secret someone had killed to bury. The wedding chamber smelled of beeswax, winter roses, and a mistake no one in the capital intended to admit. Eliza Wren sat on the edge of the carved walnut bed with both hands folded so tightly in her lap that the silver thimble hidden in her sleeve pressed a crescent into her palm. Beyond the closed doors, servants moved through Blackwood House with the careful silence reserved for funerals, royal visits, and marriages that had already gone wrong. This one had managed to become all three before midnight. By royal decree, Duke Adrian Blackwood was supposed to have married Lady Lydia Ashford that afternoon. Lydia was the polished third daughter of one of the oldest houses in the kingdom, educated by court tutors, trained to dance without ever stepping on a hem, and praised by every ambitious mother in the capital as exactly the sort of woman who belonged beside a duke. Instead, when the cathedral doors opened, the bride beneath the ivory veil had been Eliza. The Ashfords called it an emergency. Lydia had developed a violent fever after sunset the night before. The wedding date had been sealed by the king, foreign envoys had already arrived, and postponement would have been interpreted as a political insult. Lord Ashford had therefore offered another daughter, insisting that the spirit of the alliance mattered more than the identity of the bride. He had not mentioned that Eliza had spent most of her life in a village 40 miles from the capital. He had not mentioned that she was his second daughter by a woman he had never married. He had certainly not mentioned that Eliza had been summoned to the city at dawn, dressed in an altered gown before breakfast, and told that refusing would leave the elderly woman who had raised her without the small tenancy that kept a roof over her head. By noon, she had become a substitute bride. By sunset, society had found a crueler phrase. Country counterfeit. Eliza had heard it whispered behind fans in the cathedral vestibule. She had heard another woman laugh about the crooked stitches near the hem of her borrowed gown. She had heard a young lord wonder how long it would take Blackwood to send her back. None of it had surprised her. The only thing that frightened her was the man who would decide whether they were right. The bedroom door opened. Adrian Blackwood entered alone. He had removed the ceremonial sash he had worn at the wedding, but he was still dressed in black evening clothes cut with the severe precision of a military uniform. At 39, he looked less like the romantic hero court gossip had made of him and more like what he had actually been for most of his adult life, a commander who had survived enough battles to stop wasting movement. His expression was calm. That made Eliza more nervous than anger would have. He closed the door behind him. "I knew before the vows," he said. Eliza lifted her eyes. His voice was low and controlled. "Your father sent a note to my steward 20 minutes before the procession. He explained that Lady Lydia was ill and that he had provided a replacement." The last word landed without cruelty, but it still made her fingers tighten. "I see. Do you?" She almost smiled. It was the first honest question anyone had asked her all day. "I understand that you were deceived," she said. "I understand that you did not choose me. And I understand that if you mean to send me back tonight, it would be better if you told me before the servants finish unpacking a trunk that contains almost nothing." Something changed in his face. Not softness. Attention. "You expect to be sent back." "My father expects it." "Those are not the same thing." No, Eliza swallowed. "But he is usually more confident when another person is about to be humiliated than when he is about to be inconvenienced." For the first time, Adrian's mouth moved as if he had almost forgotten not to smile. He crossed the room toward her. Eliza stood at once. The thimble slipped from her sleeve. It struck the floor once, rolled in a bright circle across the carpet, and stopped against the toe of his polished boot. Adrian went perfectly still. He looked down. The thimble was small, old, and worn smooth where decades of fingers had polished the silver. On one side, barely visible beneath the scratches, was a tiny engraved W surrounded by 3 dots. Adrian bent and picked it up. When he straightened, the controlled distance in his face was gone. "Where did you get this?" Eliza blinked. "It was my mother's." "What was her name?" "Maeve Wren." His fingers closed around the thimble. The color drained from his face so quickly that Eliza took an involuntary step forward. "Your Grace? How old were you when she died?" 11. "Did she ever live near Eastmere Pass?" Eliza stared at him. "For a year, before I was born. She worked with a group of traveling seamstresses attached to a field hospital. She said there had been fighting nearby." Adrian sat down as if his legs had made the decision before he had. The thimble lay in his open palm. 20 years earlier, before he had inherited Blackwood, before anyone called him Your Grace, 19-year-old Adrian had been a lieutenant in a border regiment trapped after an ambush at Eastmere Pass. He had lost blood for 2 days in the cellar of a burned farmhouse while enemy patrols searched the road above him. A young seamstress had found him there. She had shared the last of her bread, cleaned the wound with boiled water, and repaired his torn uniform because the black and gold cloth would have marked him as an officer if he tried to escape wearing it in pieces. She had worked beside a single candle, using a silver thimble engraved with a W and 3 tiny dots. He had never forgotten the sound it made against the needle. He had never forgotten her telling him that a soldier who survived an ambush owed the world more than revenge. He had gone back looking for her after the campaign. She was gone. For years, he had believed she had died during the winter evacuation. Now her daughter stood in his wedding chamber wearing a gown altered in haste, waiting to be discarded by a second household in the same day. "Eliza," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She heard the difference. "My mother knew you. She saved my life." Silence filled the room. Eliza looked at the thimble in his hand, then at him. "She never gave me your name. She may not have known it. I told her I was Adrian Cole. Cole was my mother's family name. I was afraid anyone sheltering a Blackwood would be punished if I was found." A memory stirred in Eliza. Her mother, laughing softly while repairing a stable boy's coat. A story about a stubborn young officer who had tried to stand before he could walk without fainting. "The boy with the terrible stitches," she whispered. Adrian stared. Eliza covered her mouth, but it was too late. "My mother said she once repaired a coat for a wounded officer who argued that his own stitching was perfectly serviceable. She said it looked as though a frightened spider had crossed the fabric." Adrian closed his eyes briefly. She promised never to repeat that. She apparently considered death the expiration of the agreement. A startled laugh escaped him. It was quiet and brief, but real. The tension in the room shifted. Not disappeared. Nothing that complicated vanished because of one old piece of silver. Adrian placed the thimble carefully in her palm and folded her fingers over it. "I was prepared to annul the marriage tonight," he said. Eliza's stomach tightened. "I will not do that without your consent now." She looked up sharply. "This changes what I owe your mother," he continued. "It does not give me the right to decide your future because of a debt you did not create. That is a remarkably inconvenient distinction for a duke. It is proving to be an inconvenient evening." She studied him, uncertain whether she was allowed to find him amusing. He stood again. "You need sleep. Tomorrow we will speak with my solicitor. If you want the marriage ended, I will see that you are protected financially and that no retaliation reaches the woman who raised you." Eliza's breath caught. "How do you know about her?" "I read the note your father sent. He listed what he considered your liabilities." Adrian's jaw tightened. He was thorough. Aunt Ruth is not a liability. I agree. And if I choose not to annul it? His gaze rested on her for a moment. Then we decide what this marriage becomes when neither of us is being threatened into it. He walked toward the door. Eliza spoke before he reached it. Your Grace. He turned. Did my mother really save your life? Yes. Then why did she never tell me she knew a duke? Adrian's expression changed again, this time with something that looked almost like grief. Because when she knew me, I was only a frightened boy bleeding on her floor. He opened the door. And perhaps she was kind enough to remember me that way. The next morning, Eliza woke to sunlight across unfamiliar sheets and the unsettling knowledge that she was still the Duchess of Blackwood. No one came to drag her from the house. Instead, a maid brought breakfast and informed her that the Duke was waiting in the library with his solicitor, Mrs. Beatrice Hale. Eliza, dressed in the plainest gown she owned, tucked the silver thimble into a pocket sewn inside the sleeve, and went downstairs. The Blackwood Library was larger than the village chapel where she had spent half her childhood. Shelves climbed 2 stories, connected by narrow iron galleries. Maps filled one wall. On another hung portraits of generations of Blackwoods who all seemed mildly offended that Eliza existed. Adrian stood near the windows. Beside him sat a silver-haired woman with a legal folio open across her knees. Eliza Wren Blackwood, she said. Sit down. His Grace has spent the morning irritating 3 ministries on your behalf, so I would like to make sure the result is worth the paperwork. Eliza liked her immediately. Mrs. Hale explained the legal position. The marriage was valid. The royal decree named a daughter of House Ashford, not Lydia specifically, because Lord Ashford had insisted the wording remain broad in case of illness or travel delay. The substitution had been deceitful, but not technically unlawful. Eliza could petition for dissolution on grounds of coercion. Adrian could petition on grounds of fraud. Neither filing would be simple. Both would be public. And if neither of us petitions? Eliza asked. Then you remain married, Mrs. Hale said. Which would be a conventional answer to an extremely unconventional problem. Eliza looked toward Adrian. What do you want? The question seemed to surprise him. I want your father to learn that women are not interchangeable pieces in a treaty, he said. I want to know what became of Maeve Wren. I want to understand why your father considered threatening your aunt an acceptable way to secure your obedience. And I want none of those desires to become another cage for you. That is 4 once. I have been awake since 5. Mrs. Hale hid a smile behind her hand. Eliza looked at the legal papers. Returning to Ashford House was impossible. Aunt Ruth's cottage was technically owned by an Ashford estate trust. If Eliza challenged the marriage immediately, her father could make Ruth homeless before Blackwood protection reached the village. But staying meant living in a house where every servant knew she had not been the intended bride. It meant appearing at court beside a man who had expected another woman. It meant becoming a duchess when she had never even been allowed to call herself Lady Eliza in her father's home. What if I stay for 6 months, she asked. Mrs. Hale leaned forward. Not as a favor, Eliza continued. And not because of my mother. 6 months. During that time, Aunt Ruth's cottage is transferred to her name. Permanently. I receive an independent allowance I can keep whether the marriage continues or not. I am allowed to work. Adrian's brows lifted. Work at what? Embroidery. Restoration. Textile design. Whatever people will pay me for. You are a duchess. I noticed. It will cause comment. So did the wedding. Mrs. Hale coughed into her fist. Adrian regarded Eliza for several seconds. Then he nodded. Done. And at the end of 6 months, either of us may ask for a dissolution without punishment, accusation, or financial retaliation. Done. And no one calls me Lady Lydia by accident. Something dark flashed through his eyes. If anyone in this house does that, they will have a very short future in household service. Eliza believed him. Mrs. Hale began writing. For the first time since the red veil had been lowered over her face the previous morning, Eliza felt that something about the marriage belonged to her. Not the beginning. Not the bargain that had forced her into it. But perhaps the next 6 months. She could choose those. And for now, that was enough. The first week of Eliza's marriage taught her that a great house could be more exhausting than a village market and far less honest. At the market, people haggled in public. At Blackwood House, they smiled while measuring the distance between her gloves and the correct edge of a dinner plate. The staff were not openly unkind. Adrian's household was too disciplined for that. But Eliza noticed the pauses. The footman who hesitated before saying "Your Grace." The housekeeper who asked 3 times whether she wished to keep Lady Lydia's rooms prepared in the west wing. The seamstress who arrived with court gowns already cut to another woman's measurements. Eliza refused to be embarrassed by any of it. She asked for a workroom instead of a dressing salon. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, stared at her. A workroom, Your Grace? With a north window if possible. Good daylight, not direct sun. A wide table. Locking cabinets. And if the old embroidery frames in storage have not been eaten by worms, I would like those too. Mrs. Finch's expression suggested that duchesses had requested stranger things, though perhaps not before breakfast. The room they found had once belonged to Adrian's grandmother. It smelled of cedar and dust. By the 3rd day, Eliza had opened the shutters, cleaned the long work table, and arranged needles by size in a wooden tray. She set her mother's thimble beside the lamp. Then she began taking commissions. Not because she needed money. The allowance Mrs. Hale had negotiated for her was more than Aunt Ruth had seen in 10 years. She worked because she understood what happened to women who allowed every useful part of themselves to become decorative. Her first commission came from the Blackwood Chapel. A century-old altar cloth had split along a goldwork border. The chaplain expected Eliza to hand it to a professional workshop in the city. She repaired it herself. Adrian found her there after midnight, bent beneath a lamp, one eye narrowed as she coaxed a thread of tarnished gold through linen so fragile it seemed to breathe. "You know we can hire people for this," he said from the doorway. Eliza did not look up. "You can also hire people to read military reports. Yet you insist on doing that yourself." "Military reports sometimes contain information that matters. So does cloth." He entered. She felt him watching her hands. "What does that mean?" Eliza tied off the thread. "Fabric tells you how people live. Cheap repairs on expensive sleeves mean a family is pretending to have more money than it does. A new lining in an old coat means someone expects to keep wearing it. Uneven fading around a crest means an emblem was removed. Different thread tension can tell you where a seam was opened and closed again." Adrian's gaze sharpened. "Opened and closed to hide something?" "Sometimes." He leaned one hand against the table. Eliza finally looked at him. "Was my mother involved in something besides saving your life?" The question had waited between them since their wedding night. Adrian was silent for too long. "Yes." He pulled out the chair opposite her. "Eastmere was not a normal ambush," he said. "Our route was changed less than 6 hours before we marched. Only 4 men outside the regiment knew the new road. Someone sold the information." Eliza set down her needle. "Was the traitor found?" "No." "Then why did my mother leave?" "I do not know. But the night she helped me escape, she told me she had seen something sewn into the lining of an officer's cloak. She said it proved the attack had been prepared from inside our own command." "What did she see?" "She would not say while I was feverish. She promised to show me when we reached safety." Adrian looked toward the dark window. We were separated during the evacuation. By the time I could return, the field hospital had burned and the civilians had scattered. Eliza thought of her mother's boxes. Pattern books. Fabric scraps. Old receipts. Tiny notes written in margins so narrow that Aunt Ruth used to complain Maeve could hide a confession inside a hem. I have her workbooks, Eliza said. Adrian's head turned. At Ruth's cottage. Most of them. My father never wanted them. When can we get them? Eliza narrowed her eyes. You are asking very quickly for a man who just spent 5 days pretending he had no interest in my sewing. I was wrong. The answer came without hesitation. She smiled despite herself. 2 days later, a Blackwood carriage traveled to Belmere Village under guard. Aunt Ruth arrived at the estate with 3 trunks, 6 chickens she refused to abandon, and a conviction that dukes were merely men who owned too many rooms. She embraced Eliza in the front hall, inspected Adrian from boots to eyebrows, then said, "You look healthier than the last officer Maeve dragged home." Adrian nearly dropped his tea. Ruth had known. Not his title, but the story. Maeve had spoken of the wounded lieutenant for years. She said you were too stubborn to die, Ruth told him that evening. She considered it your worst quality and your best. Adrian sat unusually still. Did she ever tell you why she left Eastmere? Ruth's humor vanished. She became afraid. Of whom? She never named him. Only said the wrong man had noticed that she noticed too much. Eliza's skin prickled. Ruth opened the first trunk. Inside were 30 years of Maeve's workbooks. For 3 nights, Eliza and Adrian went through them together. The books were not diaries. Maeve had recorded measurements, dye formulas, repairs, customers, costs, and sketches. To anyone else, they looked painfully ordinary. To Eliza, they were full of her mother's habits. Maeve never drew flowers without a reason. A 5-petal rose indicated silk. 3 leaves meant linen. A broken stem meant payment had not been received. In one book dated the winter of Eastmere, Eliza found 12 pages where none of the symbols followed the normal system. There were black triangles beside officers' initials. There were tiny crowns stitched in the margin using brown thread rather than ink. And beside one entry for cloak, officer, midnight repair, Maeve had drawn the W from her thimble next to 4 dots instead of 3. Eliza stared at it. My mother's mark had 3 dots. Adrian leaned over her shoulder. What would 4 mean? I don't know. Ruth, sorting buttons across the table, looked up. Danger. Eliza turned. Ruth's mouth tightened. Maeve added a 4th dot when she wanted to remember that a customer made her uneasy. She said fear was information, and information deserved a mark. Adrian pulled the book closer. The initials beside the entry were EV. Eliza read them twice. Adrian did not need to. Edmund Vale, he said. Who is he? The King's current Minister of Supply. The same man scheduled to dine at Blackwood House the following week. Before they could decide what the discovery meant, House Ashford struck first. Lord Ashford arrived without invitation on a grey Tuesday afternoon, accompanied by Lydia, 2 solicitors, and enough outrage to furnish an entire theatre. Eliza was in the drawing room reviewing invoices for the estate's textile stores when the doors opened. Her father did not greet her. He looked at her gown, the Blackwood signet at her wrist, and the papers on the table as if she had stolen all 3. This farce ends today. Eliza folded the invoice. Good afternoon to you too. Lydia stood behind him, pale but perfectly composed. She had recovered from her fever with impressive speed. Adrian entered from the opposite door. Lord Ashford. You were not announced because you were not invited. Ashford stiffened. Your Grace, my daughter is well enough to fulfill the original arrangement. Eliza looked at Lydia. For the first time, she saw not a rival but a woman standing very straight while her father discussed her like delayed cargo. Adrian's voice cooled. I am already married. To the wrong daughter. The room went silent. Eliza expected the words to hurt more than they did. Perhaps because she had heard versions of them all her life. Wrong mother. Wrong education. Wrong household. Wrong daughter. Adrian took one step forward. Eliza lifted a hand. No. He looked at her. I would like to answer. Something in his expression softened. He stepped back. Eliza faced her father. You told me Lydia was dying. I told you she was dangerously ill. You told Aunt Ruth that if I refused, she would lose her cottage. You owed this family obedience. I owed you nothing. Ashford's face darkened. Do not mistake a borrowed title for power. Eliza looked down at the papers before her. Interesting choice of words. She lifted one invoice. This morning I reviewed the accounts for 3 textile contracts between House Ashford and the Army. Your mills charged Blackwood twice the market rate for winter wool and delivered cloth 20% lighter than specification. Ashford froze. Lydia's eyes widened. Eliza continued. I recognized the weave because I spent 12 years repairing blankets made from it. Your mill marks were still visible under the re-dyed edges. Adrian said nothing. He did not need to. For once, the power in the room belonged entirely to Eliza. Her father's jaw flexed. You have no understanding of military procurement. Then you should be relieved that the Duke does. She placed the invoice on the table between them. Would you like him to explain it? Ashford looked at Adrian. Adrian smiled without warmth. I would be delighted. Lord Ashford left 20 minutes later without discussing annulment again. Lydia did not follow immediately. She stood in the hall while her father descended the front steps. Eliza. Eliza turned. Lydia's expression was difficult to read. I did have a fever, she said. But by morning, I was well enough to stand. Eliza waited. Father's physician ordered me back to bed anyway. He said if Blackwood accepted you, the alliance was secured. If he rejected you, Father could accuse him of humiliating our family and force better terms. Eliza felt cold. So we were both pieces. Lydia looked toward the carriage. Yes. For a moment, neither sister spoke. Then Lydia said quietly, I laughed at your gown yesterday. I heard. I am sorry. It was not enough to repair years of distance. But it was honest. Eliza nodded once. Lydia left. That evening, Adrian found Eliza in the workroom, unpicking a row of perfect stitches simply because she had realized the tension was wrong. You frightened him, he said. My father? Yes. Good. Adrian leaned against the table. You frightened me slightly too. She looked up. You command cavalry. Cavalry usually announces when it intends to charge. Eliza's mouth curved. He reached for one of Maeve's old workbooks. Dale arrives Thursday. The humor left her face. You think he betrayed you at Eastmere? I think your mother thought he was dangerous. Those are not the same thing. No, Adrian met her eyes. Which is why I need evidence, not revenge. Maeve's words, 20 years later. A soldier who survives an ambush shows the world more than revenge. Eliza looked at the silver thimble beside her lamp. For the first time, she wondered whether her mother's old debt and Adrian's old wound had not brought them together to settle the past. Perhaps they had brought them together to keep it from repeating. Minister Edmund Vale arrived at Blackwood House on Thursday wearing a blue coat embroidered with silver wheat, the insignia of the Royal Supply Office. Eliza noticed the stitching before she noticed his face. The wheat heads were worked in a technique nearly identical to one in Maeve's Eastmere notebook. Not proof, but enough to make her pulse change. Vale was in his late 50s, handsome in the polished way of men who had learned to make age look like authority. He greeted Adrian with easy familiarity, praised the dinner, and bowed over Eliza's hand as if the capital had not spent the week laughing about her. "Your Grace," he said. "A remarkable wedding. Society has spoken of little else." "I am told society has limited interests," Eliza replied. Vale's smile sharpened. Adrian hid his reaction behind his wineglass. The dinner included 6 military officers, 2 treasury clerks, Mrs. Hale, and a retired quartermaster named Captain Soren Pike. Adrian had invited them under the pretense of reviewing winter supply routes. In reality, every man at the table had some connection to Eastmere. Eliza sat at Adrian's right. For the first hour, she said almost nothing. That was how people underestimated her best. She listened as Vale discussed wool shipments, road closures, and storage depots. She watched him touch the signet on his right hand whenever Captain Pike mentioned old records. She noticed that he never drank from a glass until someone else had tasted the same wine. Then the conversation turned to military uniforms. "Modern tailoring has become unnecessarily expensive," Vale complained. "A soldier needs warmth, not decoration." Eliza looked at the silver wheat on his sleeve. "Decoration can be useful." Vale glanced at her. "Can it?" "It identifies rank, office, manufacturer, region, sometimes even the workshop that produced the thread." "Your Grace has married an expert." "In some things," Adrian said. Eliza continued, "Old embroidery can also tell you when a garment was altered. Even if someone removes a crest, the puncture pattern remains." Vale's fingers stopped against his ring. It lasted less than a second. Eliza saw it. So did Adrian. Captain Pike leaned forward. "That was a problem during Eastmere. Some of the men who attacked us wore our colors beneath enemy coats." Vale's expression did not change. "War produces strange stories." "Records too," Adrian said. The room cooled. Vale set down his fork. "Are we discussing history or supply?" "Sometimes they are the same subject." No accusation followed. Adrian had promised evidence, not revenge. So the dinner continued. But later, while the men smoked in the West Salon, Eliza returned to the dining room to retrieve a dropped handkerchief and found Vale standing beside her chair. He held her mother's silver thimble. She had carried it in a small sewing case that evening. Her stomach dropped. Vale turned it between 2 fingers. "An interesting little object." Eliza shut the door behind her. "It belongs to me." "Of course." He looked at the engraved W. "Your mother used one very much like it." The air seemed to leave the room. "You knew her?" "I knew many women during the war." "Maeve Wren?" His eyes lifted to hers. Recognition was the answer. He smiled. "She was observant. Too observant, as I recall." Eliza's fear sharpened into anger. "What did she see?" Vale placed the thimble on the table. "You are newly married, Your Grace. I would advise you to enjoy the good fortune that has found you instead of inheriting dead people's questions." "My mother's questions belong to me." "Then perhaps you inherited her worst habit." He stepped closer. Eliza did not move. "Curiosity?" she asked. "Believing that truth protects the person who discovers it." The door opened. Adrian entered. Vale stepped away at once. "Minister Blackwood." Adrian's gaze went from Vale to Eliza to the thimble on the table. "Your carriage is ready." Vale bowed. At the door, he paused. "Congratulations again on your bride." The word sounded like a threat. When he was gone, Adrian crossed the room. Did he touch you? No. Threaten you? Politely. Adrian's jaw tightened. He knew my mother. I heard. He was afraid of what she knew. I heard that too. Eliza picked up the thimble. Then we need to find what she left behind. The answer came 2 days later from a piece of embroidery no one had thought to examine for 20 years. Blackwood House possessed an old ceremonial screen presented to Adrian's father after the Eastmere campaign. It stood folded in a storage gallery, its silk panels darkened with age. The central scene showed soldiers crossing a winter bridge beneath the Blackwood crest. Eliza had noticed it because one corner was badly repaired. The thread was wrong. Not merely newer. Wrong in a way that bothered her. She moved the screen to her workroom and spent an afternoon studying it under magnification. Near the bottom edge, beneath layers of gold thread, someone had added a narrow band of plain brown stitches. They looked decorative. They were not. Eliza counted them. 7 short. 3 long. 2 short. A gap. 4 long. Her mother's notebooks used stitch length to record numbers when customers did not pay immediately. Eliza fetched the Eastmere book. The pattern matched a page where Maeve had written supply quantities beside officer initials. Adrian came in just as Eliza pulled a narrow strip of linen from behind the screen's lining. A message had been sewn into it using faded black thread. Not words. Columns of initials and numbers. Adrian read the first line. EV, 12 wagons. North Road. Payment after passage. Eliza's hands went cold. The second line listed a date 3 days before the Eastmere ambush. The third named a courier. The fourth listed Lord Ashford's father. Eliza stared. Adrian swore softly. My grandfather, she whispered. Yes. Then my family was involved. His name is here. We do not yet know how. Eliza backed away from the screen. Pieces of her childhood rearranged themselves. Her mother's refusal to speak about the capital. Lord Ashford's contempt for Maeve. The decision to send Eliza to the countryside almost immediately after Maeve died. The trunks no one wanted. What if my father knew? Adrian's voice gentled. Then we prove it. And if he didn't? Then we prove that instead. Eliza looked at him. You really mean that? What? That you would rather know something inconvenient than believe something useful. Adrian's expression went still. I spent 20 years believing a useful story. The enemy ambushed us. Men died. War was cruel. It allowed everyone who survived to move on. He looked at the stitched message. If that story was false, I owe the dead better. They brought Mrs. Hale into the workroom before midnight. By morning, she had secured a royal warrant to examine sealed military archives. That was when the danger stopped being historical. Someone entered Eliza's workroom while she slept. Nothing obvious was stolen. But the ceremonial screen had been cut open from top to bottom. The hidden message was gone. Eliza stood in the wreckage at dawn, staring at silk slashed into ribbons. Adrian arrived barefoot, coat thrown over a shirt he had not buttoned correctly. For once, the famous Duke of Blackwood looked less like a commander than a furious husband. You are moving to the East Suite. Eliza turned. No. It is beside my rooms and easier to secure. My room is already secure. Clearly not. The screen was attacked, not me. That distinction is not comforting. It should be. I am harder to cut. Eliza. His voice cracked like a command. She straightened. I will not spend the next 5 months being protected out of my own life. His anger stopped. She pointed at the ruined screen. This is what men like Vale count on. They frighten people into becoming quiet. My mother was forced to disappear. I was sent away. Lydia was placed in a bed and told to stay there. I will not cooperate with the pattern. Adrian took a breath. Then another. What do you propose? It mattered that he asked. Eliza looked at the torn silk. We let whoever did this believe they succeeded. Mrs. Hale had photographed the stitched linen before storing it in her folio. The thief had stolen the original. He had not stolen the evidence. For the next week, Eliza behaved as if the investigation had ended. She attended a charitable luncheon. She accepted a restoration commission from the Royal Museum. She spent an afternoon choosing curtains with Mrs. Finch and allowed 3 gossiping ladies to conclude that the new Duchess cared more about upholstery than treason. At night, she and Adrian read the old supply files. The records showed that Edmund Vale, then a junior logistics officer, had rerouted 12 wagons away from Eastmere 2 days before the ambush. He claimed the road was flooded. It had not rained that week. The missing wagons carried winter uniforms. 3 months later, enemy officers were seen wearing black cloth with a distinctive black and gold lining. House Ashford had manufactured that lining. The ledger held one more surprise. Lord Ashford's father had reported the missing cloth himself. He had not helped steal it. He had discovered the theft. 2 weeks later, he died in a hunting accident. Eliza sat back from the table. My grandfather tried to expose Vale. Adrian nodded. And my father inherited a family story that said the subject was dangerous. Possibly. Maybe that is why he hated my mother. Because she reminded him of it. Or because she knew more than he wanted to know. Eliza rubbed her eyes. It was after 2 in the morning. Adrian pushed a cup of tea toward her. She took it without looking. Their hands touched. Neither moved away immediately. The silence changed. Eliza lifted her eyes. Adrian was watching her. Not the thimble. Not Maeve's daughter. Her. The realization unsettled her more than Vale's threat. We have 4 months left, she said quietly. He understood at once. Until the agreement. Yes. I remember. You have not mentioned it recently. I was trying not to turn every conversation into a negotiation about whether you will leave me. The honesty hit with surprising force. Eliza looked down at their hands. Do you want me to stay? Adrian's thumb moved once against the edge of her finger, then stopped. Yes. Because of my mother? No. The answer was immediate. Because you frighten ministers at dinner, inspect army blankets for fraud, argue with my housekeeper about curtain budgets, and once informed a royal archivist that his filing system was an insult to civilization. He put cavalry records under agriculture. I know. It was indefensible. I know. She laughed. Adrian smiled. Then the smile faded. I want you to stay, he said. But I will not ask while you are still deciding whether you ever had a choice. Eliza's throat tightened. For a man who had begun their marriage with the power to dismiss her, he had become unexpectedly careful with the word choice. She pulled her hand back, not because she wanted distance, but because she needed to know that she could. Adrian let her. That mattered too. The next morning, a letter arrived from Lydia. It contained no greeting. Only one sentence. Father has been meeting Vale in secret for years. Beneath it was an address in the old mercantile quarter. Eliza read it twice. Then she handed it to Adrian. The past had finally found the door. The address Lydia sent belonged to a shuttered counting house near the river, a narrow brick building squeezed between a rope merchant and a warehouse that had not held grain in years. Adrian wanted soldiers. Eliza wanted discretion. Mrs. Hale wanted both of them to stop behaving as if a royal warrant made them immortal. In the end, they compromised. Captain Pike and 4 Blackwood guards waited 2 streets away while Eliza, Adrian, and Mrs. Hale entered through the front under the pretense of inspecting old Ashford business records. The ground floor was empty. The upper office was not. Someone had been there recently. A lamp still smelled of oil. Ash lay warm beneath the grate. On the desk sat ledgers bound in faded red leather. Eliza opened the first. It was an Ashford account book. The entries covered more than 20 years. Most were ordinary: wool, dye, transport fees, wages. Then she found payments marked with a 4. symbol. Her mother's danger mark. The first dated to Eastmere. The recipient was E. Vale. The second came 2 weeks after Eliza's grandfather died. The third was dated the year Maeve returned from the border. Eliza's hands went cold. "What is it?" Adrian asked. She turned the book toward him. A payment had been made to M. Wren, relocation. The amount was large enough to buy a farm. Her mother had never owned one. Eliza read the entry again. "Why would my family pay her?" Mrs. Hale leaned over the page. "Perhaps they paid someone else to make her leave." The sound of the front door opening echoed below. Adrian looked at Eliza once. No panic. No wasted words. He blew out the lamp. Footsteps climbed the stairs. Lord Ashford entered first. Edmund Vale followed him. For several seconds, nobody moved. Ashford looked 20 years older than he had at Blackwood House. Eliza. It was the first time her father had said her name without irritation. She almost hated him more for the softness. Vale recovered first. "Well," he said. "This is becoming repetitive." Adrian stepped between him and Eliza. "Stay where you are." Vale laughed. "Still commanding rooms as if they were battlefields." "Usually works." Lord Ashford stared at the ledger in Eliza's hands. "Put that down." "No. Eliza, you do not understand what you are reading. I have heard that sentence from men who were wrong with remarkable consistency." His face tightened. Vale moved toward the desk. Adrian's hand went to the knife at his belt. Vale stopped. Mrs. Hale said, "Minister, if you touch that ledger, I will personally make certain the Crown learns why." Vale's pleasant mask cracked. "The Crown has benefited from my work for 30 years. Then it should survive hearing about the first 10. Lord Ashford closed his eyes. Eliza looked at him. "Did you know?" He did not answer. "Did you know Vale betrayed the Eastmere Regiment?" "No." The answer came quickly. "Did you know grandfather suspected him?" A pause. "Yes." Eliza felt something inside her go very still. "Did you know my mother saw evidence?" Another pause. "Yes." Adrian's shoulders hardened. Eliza barely noticed. "Did you send her away?" Ashford looked at her then. "I tried to keep her alive." The words were so unexpected that Eliza almost laughed. "You kept her alive by making her disappear?" "Your grandfather died 3 days after he told me he intended to accuse Vale. Officially, it was a hunting accident. I was 22. I knew what it meant." His voice shook once, then steadied. "Maeve came to me with copies of his notes. She had seen Vale alter uniforms and route maps during the war. She had helped a wounded officer escape." His eyes flicked toward Adrian. "Though she never knew who he became. She believed my father had been killed because he discovered the same conspiracy." "So you helped her?" Eliza asked. "I gave her money and told her to leave the capital. I told Vale she had gone overseas. But she had not." "No. She went north. To Belmere." "Yes." Eliza struggled to fit this version of her father beside the man who had threatened Ruth's home. "Then why did you treat her like shame?" Ashford's face changed. Because here lay the part he could not dress as protection. I was afraid. Eliza waited. I married for position. I inherited a damaged house. I spent 20 years trying to make certain no one could touch us again. Maeve reminded me of what I had failed to do when my father died. You reminded me of her. That is not an answer. No. His voice dropped. It is an excuse. Vale made a disgusted sound. How moving. He reached inside his coat. Adrian moved first. The room erupted. Vale drew a pistol small enough to hide beneath formal clothing. Adrian struck his wrist before he could aim. The shot tore into the ceiling. Plaster rained over the desk. Mrs. Hale ducked behind a chair. Lord Ashford stumbled backward. Eliza grabbed the ledger and dropped to the floor as Adrian drove Vale against the wall. The pistol skidded under a cabinet. Vale was older, but desperation gave him strength. He struck Adrian across the jaw with a brass paperweight and lunged for the window. Before he reached it, the door burst open. Captain Pike entered with the Blackwood Guards. Within seconds, Vale was on his knees with his arms bound behind him. He looked up at Adrian, blood at the corner of his mouth. You think this changes anything? Half the court bought uniforms from those contracts. Ministers signed them. Generals profited. Kings prefer clean victories. Adrian wiped blood from his lip. Then they can explain themselves in a dirty hearing. Vale looked toward Eliza. For the first time, he seemed to see her not as Maeve Wren's daughter or Blackwood's accidental wife, but as the person who had ended him. You should have stayed in the country. Eliza held the ledger against her chest. My father tried that. Captain Pike laughed once. Vale was taken away before sunrise. The scandal broke 3 days later. It consumed the capital. Royal investigators reopened the Eastmere inquiry. Surviving quartermasters were questioned. Warehouse owners produced records they had been afraid to reveal. The Crown suspended Vale from office, then charged him with treason, fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of Lord Ashford's father. Lord Ashford was not charged with the old crimes. He was, however, investigated for coercing Eliza into the marriage and for more recent procurement fraud. The latter proved painfully real. He had not inherited all his father's courage. Some of the Ashford textile contracts had indeed been manipulated to keep the family solvent. Eliza did not rescue him from the consequences. That surprised him. You would let the estate fall? He asked when she visited him during the inquiry. I would let you answer for what you did. And your sisters? I will not let them starve because you cheated the army. His expression twisted. You sound like your mother. For once, Eliza accepted it as praise. Lydia took control of what remained of the family's legitimate business. She dismissed 2 corrupt managers, sold a townhouse no one could afford, and began rebuilding the mills under direct inspection. Her fever, Eliza learned, had been partly real and partly convenient. Her relief at escaping the wedding had been entirely real. I did not want to marry Adrian, Lydia admitted when she came to Blackwood House several weeks later. I wanted to want it because everyone told me it was the best possible future. Eliza poured tea. And now? Now I want to learn why our wool contracts were a disaster and perhaps never attend another bridal fitting as long as I live. Eliza laughed. Lydia looked toward the workroom where strips of the ruined ceremonial screen lay arranged for restoration. Do you love him? The question struck harder than Eliza expected. I don't know. That usually means yes in novels. Life has been inconsiderate enough without borrowing rules from novels. Lydia smiled. Fair. But after she left, the question remained. 6 months had seemed enormous on the morning after the wedding. Now only 3 weeks remained. By then, Eliza knew the rhythm of Adrian's footsteps in the hall. She knew he drank coffee when worried and tea when tired. She knew he read reports standing up, forgot meals during investigations, and had a habit of rubbing the scar beneath his left shoulder when cold weather made the old Eastmere wound ache. She knew he never entered her workroom without knocking. She knew he had transferred Ruth's cottage into Ruth's name within 48 hours of their agreement and never mentioned it again. She knew that after the break-in, he doubled the guards but did not move Eliza's bedroom once she refused. She knew he listened when she said no. And she knew, with increasing discomfort, that she had begun listening for him to come home. One evening, Adrian found her restoring the Blackwood ceremonial screen. "You are repairing it?" "Of course. It was cut nearly in half." "Then it needs twice as much patience." He watched her fit a damaged piece of silk into place. "Can it be made exactly as it was?" "No." Adrian sat opposite her. "Does that bother you?" "It used to." She threaded a needle. "Then I learned that good restoration isn't pretending damage never happened. It's making the structure strong enough that the damage no longer controls what happens next." He was silent. Eliza glanced up. He was looking at her with such open feeling that she missed the eye of the needle. "Stop that." "What?" "Looking at me as if I said something profound." "You did." "I was talking about silk." "I know." She tried again to thread the needle. Her hands were suddenly less steady. Adrian reached across the table. "May I?" She gave him the needle. A duke who could coordinate 6,000 soldiers narrowed his eyes at a length of thread for almost a full minute. Eliza bit the inside of her cheek. "Do not laugh." "I am not." "You are visibly preparing to." "I would never insult the man who survived Eastmere." "You are insulting the man currently losing a battle with cotton." She laughed anyway. He finally got the thread through the needle and looked absurdly pleased. Eliza took it from him. Their fingers touched. This time, neither moved away. 3 weeks, Adrian said. "Yes. I spoke to Mrs. Hale today." Eliza's heart stumbled. "The dissolution papers are prepared." She looked at him. He held her gaze. "I promised you a choice. I will not wait until the last day and make the paperwork another kind of pressure." The room seemed very quiet. "You already signed them?" "Yes." She had expected freedom to feel lighter. Instead, grief rose so quickly that she had to put the needle down. Adrian saw it. He did not reach for her. That restraint almost undid her. "If you sign," he said, "the marriage ends. The allowance remains yours. Ruth keeps her house. Your workroom can be moved anywhere you choose. I will publicly state that the dissolution was mutual and that you acted with honor throughout." "And if I don't sign?" His voice lowered. "Then I would like to ask whether we can begin again." "We are already married." "Legally." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I was thinking of something more difficult." Eliza looked down at the ruined and repaired silk between them. "What does beginning again look like?" "I ask you to dinner instead of discovering you under a veil." "That would be an improvement." "I tell you when I am angry instead of becoming terrifyingly polite." "You do become very polite." "You stop pretending you are not afraid simply because you dislike being underestimated." Her eyes narrowed. "That sounds suspiciously like a criticism." "It is a proposal for mutual honesty." She smiled despite herself. Then he became serious. "And if, after all of that, you decide you want a life that does not include me, I let you go without making you pay for having been loved." Loved. The word rested between them. Adrian's expression changed as if he realized he had said it before deciding to. Eliza's throat tightened. "Do you?" He did not pretend not to understand. "Yes." "When?" "I don't know." Somewhere between you accusing the archive of crimes against organization and you facing Vale with a sewing ledger in your hands. That is not romantic. It is unfortunately accurate. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Ask me after the hearing." The royal hearing began the following Monday. It lasted 7 hours. Eliza expected to be treated as a witness. Instead, for the first 2 hours, half the chamber treated her as entertainment. She heard the whispers. The substitute bride. The country seamstress. The accidental duchess. One elderly lord actually asked whether needlework evidence could be trusted in a matter of treason. Eliza stood before the council table and unfolded a reproduction of Maeve's stitched message. "My lord, do you trust military maps?" "Of course. They are marks on paper agreed to mean something. These are marks in thread agreed by their maker to mean something. The material changes. The principle does not." A few people smiled. The old lord did not. "Can you prove the code?" "Yes." Eliza produced Maeve's workbooks, 6 unrelated garments, and 3 unpaid village accounts from 25 years earlier. The same stitch-length system appeared in all of them. Numbers recorded in thread matched numbers written elsewhere in ink. Then Captain Pike testified that the names on the hidden linen matched officers present before the Eastmere route change. Then the archive clerk produced Vale's wagon orders. Then Lydia Ashford testified that her father had met privately with Vale for years, believing the minister capable of destroying the family if old questions resurfaced. Finally, Lord Ashford stood. He did something Eliza had not expected. He told the truth. Not elegantly. Not heroically. He admitted his fear. He admitted threatening Ruth's tenancy. He admitted using Eliza as a substitute bride because he thought her easier to sacrifice than Lydia. He admitted that when Maeve died, he had sent Eliza away because looking at her reminded him of the courage he had not shown. The chamber was silent when he finished. Eliza did not forgive him. But she believed him. Sometimes truth did not repair a relationship. Sometimes it only stopped the lie from poisoning another generation. Vale was convicted 2 months later. The Eastmere dead were formally cleared of the accusation that poor scouting had caused the ambush. Their families received compensation. Adrian ordered a memorial built at the pass, not to himself, but to the soldiers, civilians, field workers, and unnamed people who had carried the wounded to safety. Maeve Wren's name appeared among them. Eliza stood before the new stone in early spring with her silver thimble warm in her hand. Adrian waited several steps away. He had learned when to come closer. He had also learned when not to. "My mother would hate this," Eliza said. "The memorial?" "Her name in letters that large." Adrian smiled. She disliked attention. She would say the stone could have been used for a better bridge. That also sounds accurate. Eliza looked at her mother's name. For years, Maeve had been reduced to 2 stories, the disgraced seamstress Lord Ashford did not speak of, and the mysterious woman who saved a wounded lieutenant. Neither was enough. She had been clever. Afraid. Brave. Practical. Sometimes angry. A mother. A worker. A woman who had hidden evidence in stitches because powerful men controlled paper. Eliza slipped the thimble back into her pocket. "I'm ready." Adrian did not move. "For what?" "You said you wanted to ask me something after the hearing." "That was months ago." "You are very slow for a cavalry commander." He looked almost nervous. Eliza enjoyed that more than she should have. Adrian stepped closer. "Eliza Wren Blackwood." "Still technically, yes." "Would you like to remain my wife?" She raised an eyebrow. "That is your proposal?" "I had a longer version." "Use it." He exhaled. "I cannot offer you a beginning without mistakes." We already had one. I cannot promise never to try to protect you when you would rather be allowed to take the risk. I can promise to listen when you tell me the difference. She said nothing. He continued. I do not want you because Maeve saved my life. I am grateful to her because she did. Those are separate things. His eyes held hers. I want you because you are inconveniently observant, alarmingly brave, impossible to patronize, and because my house felt like a command post until you filled one room with thread, arguments, and chickens your aunt insists are temporary guests. They are not temporary. I know that now. Eliza smiled. I want you because when I imagine the next year, you are there. When I imagine the next 20, you are still there. And because I have spent most of my life surviving things. With you, I would like to learn how to live in between them. The spring wind moved through the grass. Eliza let him wait. Not to punish him. Because once, everyone else had rushed her answer before she knew what she wanted. Now she knew. Yes. Adrian's shoulders dropped. But, she added. He closed his eyes briefly. Of course there is a but. My workroom stays. Yes. I take paid commissions. Yes. Aunt Ruth visits whenever she likes. She already does. The chickens remain negotiable. They have occupied the south lawn for 4 months. I believe negotiations failed. Eliza laughed. Then Adrian kissed her. It was not dramatic. There was no cathedral, no veil, no audience waiting to judge whether she belonged. Just cold spring air, a memorial stone, and the man she had first married by accident asking to be chosen on purpose. When they returned to Blackwood House, the ceremonial screen was waiting in Eliza's workroom. She had finished the restoration that morning. The damage was still visible if someone knew where to look. The new silk was a fraction brighter. The repaired gold thread caught light differently from the old. Eliza had considered disguising the difference. Instead, she embroidered one small symbol near the lower corner. AW. 3 dots. And beside it, a fourth mark transformed into a tiny star. Not danger anymore. Memory. Months later, the capital stopped calling Eliza the substitute bride. It found other things to call her. The Duchess who exposed the Eastmere conspiracy. The restorer who saved the royal battle screen. The woman who forced military suppliers to submit fabric samples before receiving payment. The patron who opened a training workshop where village girls learned embroidery, bookkeeping, and textile restoration instead of being told that clever hands were useful only when they were invisible. At court, women who once laughed at the crooked stitches in her borrowed wedding gown began asking who designed her sleeves. Eliza usually answered, I did. Lord Ashford lost several contracts and much of his political influence. He kept enough property to live comfortably, though not extravagantly. His relationship with Eliza remained careful and incomplete. He wrote occasionally. She answered when she wished. Lydia rebuilt the family mills and became known for paying workers on time, which shocked society more than any scandal. Ruth moved only after deciding Blackwood's kitchen garden needed supervision. She brought the chickens. Mrs. Finch surrendered within a week. And Adrian kept the dissolution papers in a locked drawer for years. Not because he expected to use them. Because they reminded him of the promise that had made their real marriage possible. Choice. On their first anniversary, Eliza found him in the library studying an army coat with visible suspicion. What are you doing? He held up the sleeve. The stitching looks uneven. She stared at him. It is a cuff. You said cloth contains information. It does. So? So the information here is that you caught the thread on a door handle. Adrian looked disappointed. Eliza laughed and took the coat from him. Her silver thimble flashed as she slipped it over one finger. Sit down. Yes, Your Grace. She repaired the cuff while he read dispatches beside her. It was a quiet evening. No scandal. No conspiracy. No royal decree. Only lamplight, paper, thread, and the soft metallic tap of a silver thimble against a needle. 20 years earlier, that sound had followed a wounded young officer through the worst night of his life. Now it meant he was home. And Eliza, who had entered Blackwood House wearing another woman's wedding gown, never again mistook being chosen for being valued. The first had happened to her by accident. The second she had earned, demanded, and finally chosen for herself.